Hey guys, this is Andy with Troglodyne here with George once again. Today we're going to have a little bit more of a conversational topic. We saw a couple of stories in the news today.
Those will be linked in the video below.
Right, and we'll cut to them as it's necessary to show just a few things that have been kind of roiling in the back of our minds and also that have been talked about in previous episodes here in the Troglo vlog. Mostly concerning ego investments, of course, but also concerning self-deception, about corporate culture,
and mental models,
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'll start it off with a story that is "We Need Young Programmers, We Need Old Programmers" by Mark Seaman. All right, I will cut over to that real quick. You can see over here, it is going to be linked, of course, on the video, but it is not a very long read. You can probably read it in about 10 minutes, even without necessarily being a speed reader, although it may take a bit longer if you're trying to digest the topics and think about it as we have. Anyways, I'll let George start off with it regarding some of the analysis here.
So essentially, the gist of the article is that both old and young programmers are very useful to your organization for the simple reason that they have different mental models, that they have different levels of ego investment and different levels of self-deception going on with regard to what they believe is possible and what they believe is not possible. So young programmers always, they do not allow themselves to be limited by what they don't know or what they do know, right? And that's always what a lot of people say is sort of the problem with older programmers is that, oh, they're fogies, they're stuck in their ways, stuff like that, that, you know, they say everything is impossible and so forth.
Right, which is precisely the story of the 5 monkeys that is discussed in the article, where one monkey tries to go up the ladder, the other 4 monkeys try to bring him down.
Which is,
originally it was a bad idea for the other 5 monkeys. So, you know, they just poo-poo on it, and eventually the monkeys cycle, and nobody remembers why they didn't climb up the ladder in the first place.
Yeah, which is the concept of the crab bucket we've discussed earlier, that it's essentially just you're pulling everyone down because you know they're going to get hurt, and you're an empathetic human being who doesn't want to see other people get hurt, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is, not everybody gets hurt, and frankly, if you are discarding your mental models, you should realize that, you know, maybe sometimes it's good for people to get hurt. That's how people learn, okay?
Well, right. Failure is ultimately the best teacher, so long as the student survives the experience.
Which in corporate, frankly, everyone's going to survive the experience. I've seen people literally like drop databases with corporate data.
That
cause downtime and still remain employed.
Well, I've seen one that didn't remain employed, but he didn't die.
Well, and I doubt he's homeless and on the street either. You know,
no. You know, he just cost the company, you know, over $1 million. So, you know, that's why he's no longer working there. But that's a story for another time.
But again, we've seen, you know, plenty of stories of executives make colossally stupid decisions and get paid millions of dollars. So, you know,
so it depends on context too, for how much money you can lose and still stay on. So
exactly. Or simply failing to make money. You know, there's the same sort of things that you can see all over the place. It's entirely inconsistent, and it's all about the mental models held by the people involved, right? You know, because if it's super fear of loss in the management, then they're going to be like, oh God, he made us lose money, we need to, you know, chop his head off. As opposed to if it's like a, you know, we need to win thing, then it's like, okay, well, you learned the hard way and we learned the hard way and we're done and we're going to make money from now on, and you probably won't make the same mistake twice. And if you do, then your head's coming off. But it's and that's just comes down to what you value as an organization, which startups, they're going to value these young people a lot because they don't know yet what is not possible. And number two, most of the time they are not smart enough to ask what they actually should ask for when they're in a startup environment, because most young employees who work in a startup frankly do not ask for anything close to the compensation they actually deserve for the amount of work they put in.
Well, right. There's a lot of these guys that they join a startup, that sort of thing. The amount of work that they put in, and the amount of expertise that they're able to give, even as novice or journeyman programmers, with the amount of effort that they're doing, the amount of value that they're giving to the companies, a lot of these guys should be being paid close to 200K a year, but they're definitely not going to be getting that.
Oh, no. There's no way they'd get that either in compensation directly or in stock-based compensation, especially when you consider that the valuations are all, Hollywood accounting, level fictions, because everybody's trying to avoid some kind of taxable hit on their K1s or whatever.
Yeah.
So when we get into the subject of older programmers and why they're still useful, he essentially describes it as they're not afraid to tell you the truth, and particularly about your organization's own idiocy. Why? Because they've been there, they've done that, they've worked at many other companies, they've seen exactly the same pathologies play themselves out. And the other part is, this comes to outcome dependence. They don't want you to be their friends. They don't need to feel, they don't need their ego to be stroked by complying and conforming with the culture of the company. They don't care, and they're never going to care because they don't have to care. They already have a mature life. They already have friends. They already have family. They don't need to join a cult, which is essentially what most of these companies are building themselves into, and why the old are increasingly being pushed out in these software firms, and why ageism is sort of a thing in our industry is just sort of because this cult building and sort of a intolerance for people who just don't care about that stuff at all, and have reasons which are entirely valid not to care.
Yeah. And when you talk about reasons that are entirely valid not to care, a lot of it too is they've seen this sort of thing before. They were part of a cult that before. And once you're out of that, once you've been deprogrammed either the hard way by failure or by realizing
betrayal,
you got betrayed, fired. You got fired, something like that. Once you've had that experience, you're pretty much permanently inoculated from being able to be that way again.
Yeah, you're never going to be able to believe in the corporate values and the mission and all that stuff, because the fact is nobody actually believed in it in the first place. It was really just way of having young and impressionable people get paid less and be doormats so that the company could make more money.
Right, and you see this in a more extreme form in, say, some of the more traditionally evil companies or other places to cut your teeth whenever you're working as a young man. You see a whole bunch of disillusioned people cranked out by some of the larger majors like,
IBM,
or
Oracle, or TI,
or the military.
Oh, yeah, those are all very classic organizations that are very uncaring with regards to the way that they treat their young people. But the fact is, both sides come out ahead ultimately because they gain skills, and that's sort of how their whole model works. Is we're not real picky about who we choose, but we're not exactly going to treat you like you're anything other than gum we scraped off the bottom of our shoe. So
but the point is, once you've gotten this sort of experience, you're gonna be a bit unreasonable just because of not being able to be, I won't say scammed, but you can't really be buffaloed is basically the best way to put that.
Well, your interpretation of a lot of the sort of corporate things is going to be less than charitable, shall we say.
Yes. And this is even if you're an old person that like isn't bitter. A lot of times they are bitter because of their experiences, which is perfectly reasonable from their perspective anyways. But there are even some that aren't bitter, but that still maintain that unreasonableness because even though they're smart enough, they understand why this is going on, they understand why you're doing this, they still don't agree with it because they don't see it as actually being effective towards whatever revenue goal.
Yeah, and that sort of segues into the second article that we saw, which was essentially, is your revenue model more important than your culture? And ding, 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 it sure as hell is. Because the fact is, where most of companies end up going wrong and why they actually die is because this dominant term, as this guy in the article puts it, is forgotten, and we decide to make the culture the primary thing. And when you do that, you lose your connection to the customer. Okay.
Yeah.
Your revenue model is your connection to the customer. It is your lifeline. And when your incentives stop lining up towards, I need to serve the revenue model, I need to serve the customer, I need to do all those things, that's when it's going to end up becoming increasingly divorced from reality, almost to the point of being an absolute ivory tower where the customers are like, what the hell are you people doing?
Yeah, yeah. And that is like one of the worst situations to be in, where your customers are basically like, what the hell are these guys doing every day? What are they doing with all the money that I'm throwing at them? Because it eventually it shows that resentment is building in your customer base, and a resentful customer base is not going to be one that sticks around for long.
No, and frankly,
they're going to stick around only as long as no good competitors exist. Once a good competitor exists, loyalty gone.
Oh, and the other thing is, those nice mature employees, they're paying attention because they're not dummies. If you stick around in an industry for long enough to actually become an older professional doing this stuff, most people wash out actually pretty quick of almost every industry they jump into, at least once, right?
Right. And I mean, most people just wash out, period. Like, looking at the stats of most people and their trajectory over their work life, most people just wash out.
Yeah.
It's sad, but it's true.
Yeah. But anyways, if you manage to become an elite older worker, then you're going to be watching. You're going to figure it out whenever it's clear that you are no longer serving the customer, and you are going to realize that you're going to smell blood, and you're going to be self-interested, and you're going to eventually form another firm to compete with them, after the non-compete lapses or whatever ends up happening. If you even care about this industry, which a lot of times the reason why this sort of disconnect between the customer and the revenue model happened is because the revenue just wasn't that great in the first place. Okay, that it turns out it's a dying industry or something like that, where the reason why the founders didn't sort of like keep the iron grip on it and make sure the culture was right and keep the whip hand on real strong, where we didn't have this sort of agency problem take over, where it's all about the culture and the way the firm runs rather than serving the customer.
Playing house.
Yeah, they play house. They allow playing house to happen because they don't really care about the firm anymore, because they know it's essentially on
autopilot.
It's on autopilot and death watch, and they're just gonna reap the profits.
Reap that cream and work on something else. And like, from a founder's perspective, I understand if you actually have other irons in the fire, whatever, let it die. I don't care.
Yeah, not every company has to last forever. And in the tech world, frankly, most things don't last more than 10 years in the first place. So, that's going to be actually a relatively common occurrence. But certainly a lot of the trouble is that the management inside the firm, they are self-deceiving themselves. The workers there are self-deceiving
they're
themselves.
certainly not operating under that assumption.
No, they have no idea that that's going on when that's actually the case, and they get completely flabbergasted and dumbfounded when that happens. And the fact is, had they actually understood that this was the reality, that this is like a dying firm or essentially caretaking, that would actually make the company more effective at doing that. You would actually be able to squeeze more revenue out of it in the long term. You would actually be able to keep that industry alive just a little bit longer, so you could get a few more nickels there, so that you could make the best of a bad situation. But that's
most
never the way
importantly,
people...
You would not be chasing things that you shouldn't be chasing in that scenario, right? If you already know it's dying, should you be chasing features? The answer is hell no.
No, you should be chasing efficiency. You should be chasing lower costs. You should be... the only reason why the buggy whip industry and the horses lasted as long as they did against automobiles is because just the ruthless improvements in efficiency of the distribution network and production of buggy whips, buggies, buckboards, and horses.
Yeah, it was a very efficient industry at the time, and it took automobiles probably about 20, 30 years to actually supplant them, and that was through efficiency improvements of their own.
Yeah, and it's not just efficiency, it's also resistance to shocks, because their distribution network was literally distributed like you wouldn't believe. All those sorts of things that really help an industry just be almost impossible to kill, Yeah. On the other hand, in the software world, where everything is almost totally centralized, It's very quick whenever a new industry that is dependent on some particular software model just totally collapses. There's several software business models that have just absolutely died over the years, and most of them have to do with SEO because whatever search engine you were using to get your relevance essentially changed their algorithm or died or whatever.
Yep. And, if you're, as a company, aligning your values, your ethics, whatever the heck you want to call it, that you're trying to sell your employees on as a reason to work culturally at this company instead of just, I give you the monies.
Yeah, it's all about incentives, right?
Then if those incentives don't line up with how you make money, then there's going to be either some cognitive dissonance going on in some of the employees' minds, which, like, a lot of people have to resolve that cognitive dissonance. They can't, like, brook that. And otherwise it causes resentment.
Yeah, and most of the time they either deal with that by either blowing up or they just check out.
Yeah. And either of those are not great outcomes. So, like, you're literally destroying your employees either via burnout, which is why they check out, or you lose them because you have to fire them whenever they, reach a crisis moment and blow up. And then otherwise, the people that are okay with cognitive dissonance, because there are those people, they're
going to do fine in the environment, but
they're going to do fine, but they're not going to help you deal with it.
Well, and the other problem is the people who are very okay with having two conflicting ideas exist in their heads at the same time are almost, by a rule, never good programmers, because programmers are very logical thinkers. They're very consistency oriented.
Yes, and if you have the ability to hold inconsistent logical models in your head, things that this supposition conflicts with supposition B, but that's okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah, the people who can actually compartmentalize and dissociate those sort of boxes, as you might call it, in their own head are actually quite rare. You're almost never going to find that in a young person, especially.
They're quite rare in a software programmer's mindset.
Yes.
Other places, not so uncommon. This is different for different industries, but certainly in the context that we're talking about, yes, it's going to be rare because you're going to screen out most of those applicants in the interview process.
Well, and the other part is that the software training process is not built to create dissociations, right? It's not built to create these sort of compartmentalized boxes. I mean, the military is the classic case of this. This is why they scream at you with the drill instructor and why they run you until you're literally... You're hungry and you haven't slept in 48 hours.
And why they train you to shoot the silhouette instead of the man. Just
all those sorts of things.
All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's all about breaking down your resistance to installing a new set of mental software, right? And so, and the idea is that you compartmentalize that because the old person you were is still there, okay? Yeah. They're still going to come out. They're still going to do what they do. But whenever you're in the context of the job, you're going to do the thing that you're trained to do, not the thing that you would normally do, right? And that's just not how software people in general have ever worked. I mean, it's a new industry. Almost everybody who got into it was into it because they're logical thinkers. They're into this stuff. This was their sort of bag, right? They were never like, oh, gee, software sounds like a great way of making money. I think I'll do that, Very, very rare for people to actually do that.
I mean, there's probably some new people coming into the industry because they see now the money that you can make here and are like, yeah, hell yeah, make me some money. I'll compartmentalize my mind all the time. I'll do the work to do that. I don't care. If that requires me to do a hatchet job on my brain, I'll do it because I'm tired of being a loser. That sort of thing. I've seen people say that, literally. So, like,
and
this is going to become a thing in software as we go down the road, but right now it's not as big of a concern.
Yeah, and a lot of the problem with regard to the reason people didn't actually do that was because being in software or hardware, computers in general, was essentially social leprosy. Okay?
Oh yes,
it is not a high status job by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not even like a neutral status job. It is a negative status job. You're a dang code monkey, man.
Yeah, you want them geek boys?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of funny when, people end up acting like the people in the software industry are these like super well-adjusted, non-opinionated, non-high IQ people.
Yeah, man, they're a bunch of for the most part, dorky degenerates.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and that's true almost across the entire industry. And now, like you said, the industry is starting to be populated by a bunch of new people who have no clue whatsoever how these people actually operate, and in fact are, from a point of view of like intelligence, a lot of times they're as different from those people as they are from people who are missing chromosomes and stuff, right? So
Sadly.
it's unfortunate that the difference in intelligence is that large, but it's not shocking that misunderstandings happen as a result of that,
Yeah.
And that's sort of why the software industry and the hardware industry had this social pariah status for so long, was because the people in it were so different.
Yeah. High IQ, low EQ, as they would say.
Yeah. Which, neither of the concepts are really that useful other than to just talk about, can these people hold a conversation with each other? Do they care about the same topics? Are they capable of working at a certain threshold? Which certainly that's the only thing that scientifically IQ has been proven to be useful for, is like there is a floor under which you really are not a useful worker. But aside from that, it's more like
you're pretty much good to go, man.
Yeah. It's more like, can you hold a conversation with this person? If you're 20 points out of the other person, it's unlikely.
Range, it's not going to happen. But for as far as the business world, you're gonna pretty much be everybody's within that bell curve for the most part. So you don't really have to worry about that in the corporate
it's just a matter
environment.
of who's more productive and not. That's really all it is. It's just margins of productivity at that point. But as productivity becomes less the concern and culture more the concern, like this guy has talked about in this revenue model thing, when revenue model is the primary concern, productivity is the primary concern, because you want to make money and you want to incentivize that. But whenever culture and the management and the sort of agency problem is just running amok at your firm, culture is what's the most important thing. And so those people are going to just increasingly have a worse and worse time at those places and filter themselves out or get filtered out.
Well, and whenever your culture does not align with whatever is making you profitable, not only does this article point out that, hey, eventually this cognitive dissonance is going to sort itself out, and guess what it's going to sort itself out towards? The one that makes you money. But it also shows with the author's own opinion that this cognitive dissonance is going to cause not a small amount of consternation amongst the own employees as that paradigm slowly shifts towards the revenue model. Like the example he had there was, okay, you're at Google, you're not supposed to be doing evil things, right? During, say, the aughts to 2010.
Yeah, during the boom years.
Yeah, during the boom years.
When they can afford to do so.
Yeah, but afterwards, well, what do you know? We start doing what they consider evil and basically being an ad company, which that's what they were the whole time, let's be honest.
No.
But
they just no longer have illusions because their young employees are now old employees.
Yeah, so you now have lost these illusions. You now see what's going on because the actual values that they said were just a bunch of hokum back then too. But you need to make sure that what you're doing with this is not going to hurt you in the long term. Like, look, I understand if you're a tech company, especially at that time where the average age was under 10 years, hell yeah, start a cult and say that, hey, yeah, man, we're not going to do evil because I'm not going to be here in the next 10 years to deal with the fallout.
Yeah.
That's probably what Sergey and any of the other folks at Google thought.
Yeah, man, they're doing God's work, man.
Yeah, they had no conception that this would even be here in 2020 and be such a big phenomenon.
Well, and frankly, when you're a startup guy, you're like, I would love to have that problem.
Oh yeah, it's definitely like hot corporation problems, so to speak.
Yes, ninth world problems.
Yeah, man. But once you get to that point, it's a tough problem to solve. You've really dug yourself a pretty good grave there.
Yeah, and it sort of takes the problem with solving it, and why it is so rarely solved, is that it takes the incentives changing, and usually the only thing that changes the incentives is the company realizes, oh Jesus, we're about to go under.
Yeah, and so what you see happen in those cases is a shift to where they become these well-known kind of companies that people train at, but they don't stay at, where the company eventually embraces basically their reputation, and Google is slowly in the process of that, embracing their reputation, just like Oracle did back in the day,
or
IBM, or
yeah.
that sort of thing. But the problem is with recognizing that reputation, none of the young employees that you have there are going to have that idealistic go-getter attitude that they had whenever you were a startup. The magic is literally gone.
Yeah, and that's just sort of when a firm starts its road to death.
Yeah, and like the old people can, they can work, and they'll put in a whole bunch of hard work to keep you from going into the grave as long as possible and just extract as much as possible. But like those young bucks, nah, man, they ain't gonna be able to help. It's over, man.
Well, and the thing is, those firms, whenever they get older, they increasingly have to rely on these older employees who don't care about the reputation of the firm, who are outcome independent, and just they on the reputation of the firm and things like that. They don't really care about any of those things, but they do care about the money. And so at the end of the day, they don't care who they get the money from. They just care that they got a job, right?
Yeah.
And so you as a company are not important to them, and it will at the end of the day really show with regard to when it comes down to do we need to put old Yeller down or not. They're going to put old Yeller down. They're not going to make the heroic sacrifice that is needed to save a lot of firms.
Yep. And of course, when we're talking about that heroic sacrifice, well, what are we talking about? We're talking about dropping the cognitive dissonance early by doing one of two things. Either embrace it early, let the product die a slow death with old guys that are keeping the flame burning, so to speak. Let it do that slow decline as a cash cow product, which is great, makes you a lot of money. Or you have to think of some way for your revenue model to change. If there's not a way to change, you're forced into the other decision. But if you have a way to change your revenue model, whether that's making a new product, whether that's some sort of other avenue, you should definitely be looking into that if you want to keep your culture
and your
as
company
it's
alive.
stated.
Yeah, exactly.
Because otherwise, that magic that you can get from young new employees is going to eventually extinguish. It's not going to be possible because of the age of your firm and the debt, not technical debt, but ideological debt that it has picked up through its corporate culture.
And I think that that's sort of getting back to some of the stuff we've already touched on in some other videos where it's like, why do these companies in the end not turn around? Why do they do these sorts of things? Is because they would rather play house. They would rather actually enjoy this comfortable stuff than get out of their comfort zone and realize, no, we actually do have to pivot. We have to do something. Because to do that is to admit that they are failures, and
Right.
they would rather never do that.
And there are a lot of management folks out there that they'll sign on to projects that ultimately are not really profitable. Like I've seen firms before that ramp up an entire new division when it would have been more profitable ultimately to dump all that money into the S&P and just park it.
Yeah, it's
Sorry about
really ridiculous how little thought is put into a lot of these new divisions whenever you have this management idea of, well, I'm just not going to lose. We're just going to continue to act like we're super competent, and we didn't actually get into this bad situation where we actually have to think about, oh God, I need to make money, which is really a huge emergency. And so they just don't take it with the appropriate level of seriousness.
Well, right, and that's ultimately fatal to any firm as far as their chances to make a lot of money, because that poverty mindset, because that, make no mistake, that's what it is poverty mindset. You will eventually assume the status of poverty due to that mindset because you're missing opportunities for fear of losing money.
And really, that sort of brings us full circle here as to what my point about these two articles is and how they connect, is sort of that people are missing out on a lot of things with regard to both their revenue models and their employees when they don't understand that you can align your revenue model and your incentives that are based on that such that it satisfies both the old and the young in the programming field and all the rest of your technical employees. There's no reason that you have to have this kind of bias that really pushes out the old. That is really just hurting your company for no good reason.
Like, there's no reason why Google has to have now a bad reputation because it said before, don't be evil. It could have embraced early on that this is an ad company,
and we're proud
of it.
And we're being the best damn ad company
we
ever
are
made.
Linking people to search results, and we are also advertising fine products that we are proud of.
Yeah.
You know, they could have took that approach, but they didn't.
They didn't, because that would create some cognitive dissonance in some people in management, and that was just not to be allowed. They would rather have suffered a huge grave blow to their reputation, and therefore the capital stock that they're able to get and the customers that are available to them. Just, you know, when they could have simply embraced who they were, and it probably wouldn't have been a big deal.
Yeah. Then you can focus on the more important thing, just like Paladin-san over here, and make profit agree with principle.
And the way you do that is ultimately stop the self-deception. Stop lying to yourself about what your company is, how it works, and why it works. At the end of the day, people will disagree at your company. People will not be great cultural fits. Those things will happen. But the fact is, you need those things, because everybody, as long as they are capable of aligning themselves with chasing the revenue, chasing the fiscus, chasing the money, then it's going to work out in the end, because you put two people next to each other long enough, they will either figure it out or they will come to blows. And if it's the latter, then you definitely need to get rid of them. But it almost never comes to that in the corporate environment. I think I've seen that once in my life. Okay.
Yeah, and it's not been in
software,
big software, money. It's been in lower tier corporate kind of stuff, on the ground kind of jobs.
Yeah, I was washing dishes and got a knife pulled at me. Okay, that's how these things work. It's not like, oh, you gave me a bad code review, I'm gonna shank his ass.
No, that doesn't happen.
No, these people are self-selecting away from that sort of attitude. Let me tell you, again, like we said, these nerd guys. You think any of these guys are the sort of big dudes who are like, oh, I'm gonna get you? No, they're not.
No. Like even the stereotypical programmer, like for the most part, they don't even lift.
Yeah, it's just frat boys that are harmless. That's all a tech bro is. So, anyways, hope you got some value out of this discussion here. It sort of rambled on a little bit, but the big deal is you have to accept that there's going to be different mental models and everyone involved in where you work and those things, and that this is a good thing, and you have to accept the fact that people are going to upset you because they aren't self-deceiving themselves in the ways you are, and they're not ego invested in the things that you are, and that's okay, because the fact is none of those things really matter as long as you're still pulling to the same goal.
Yep. And we may have rambled, but I sure had a good time. Hopefully y'all guys watching had a good time as well. If you do, make sure to like, subscribe, and of course comment on any sort of content that you might want us to talk about in the future, because we would love to talk about these topics. We obviously can ramble on about them on and on and on for probably hours on end, but we want some direction from you guys. If you have some, we would love to hear it.
And hey, be sure to hit that PayPal link and help us out.
Thanks.
Peace.